What's up, guys? It's Stamp. I promised you all that I would update the class guides once the game was fully launched and all the Kickstarter backings have been complete, and it is done as of last week. So here we go. This is the Vestal. We'll start off with this one, and I'll try and finish them over the next couple weeks for you. So it's time to kind of update what we did last time. With a lot of changes in the game, I wanted to bring back the class guides because I think there was value in bringing back and revisiting all of them, and I think it will help people who are coming to the game on the other consoles, on Linux and PS4 as it releases. So here we go. So the Vestal obviously is your main healer class. You should know that by now if you're coming here. A couple of the advantages and disadvantages of bringing her into a party. So she has a ton of advantages in that she can heal everybody, and she actually has some pretty viable offensive moves when used correctly. However, looking at her as a whole, there are dungeons you can run without a healer. So I guess that would be her only disadvantage. Because I do feel that, especially for newer players, you always want to bring a healer. And when you get closer to the end and you're starting to run Darkest Dungeon content, you're definitely going to want to bring a healer, and you can never have too many Vestals. I think currently the Vestal outperforms the Occultist in healing based off her consistency. She isn't as offensive or utilitarian as the Occultist is. However, I still feel that she is significantly more consistent, which carries a lot more value in the late game for playing it safe, which you're probably going to want to do more often than not. So, when we look at the Vestal and some of her combat skills that I would recommend bringing, what you see there, what you see that's marked is what I recommend. You're primarily going to run her in third position if you're going to bring a man-at-arms, possibly a jester, or an arbalist with her, in my opinion. If you were to bring like a grave robber, maybe third slot houndmaster, I'd recommend running her fourth position. It really doesn't matter for her because the skills I'm going to recommend are all going to work third, fourth position. So that's where you're going to usually run her. So the first skill, and what I feel is one of the most underrated combat skills in the game, is Judgement. So not only does that give her a heal, but it also is able to put off damage to the enemy party. So when do I typically use this? If everyone is over 80% health and she, or on her first turn, is when I use Judgement. So if everybody on the team is over 80% health, or even 75% in certain circumstances, I have her use Judgement. So that means for me, I'm not starting off if somebody's low on health using Divine Grace or Divine Comfort. Not at all. I wait until they truly need it, and I play a little more aggressively. So I don't use Judgement until they're at around 75 to 80% health, or I know I'm going into a big boss fight and I'm working from behind. I don't have any more campfires to use. The next skill I would recommend, and this is all generally speaking, is Dazzling Light, obviously with the stun. Keep in mind this really struggles on mobs that have high stun resist, and I'll kind of show you why. So if we were to go in and we look at Mr. G in the guild, you can see that the skill's completely maxed out, and there's 139% base to that stun. Now if we were to look at somebody else who is completely maxed out, so we look at our Houndmaster here, and we go to Blackjack, and we see that his stun base is 164%. Sure, it's only 25%, but it can mean a significant difference. Here's Flashbang from a Bounty Hunter, and that's up to 164% for a base stun. So again, when you're utilizing your Vestal, they shouldn't be your first option for stun. And if you are going to use them to stun, keep in mind you probably want to keep it to a mob that has less stun resist than the rest, because they're working from behind a little bit. And then, of course, you have Divine Grace, which is your basic heal, and Divine Comfort, which is your AoE heal. Now, one quick tip I can give you on utilizing Divine Grace or Divine Comfort. So let's say you have a mob who, or one of your heroes who is, you're working with an extra turn, you happen to stun the mob, and you're just going to heal it to full because that's why waste the heal when you can heal someone. Rather than using Divine Grace, I recommend using Divine Comfort, and the reason is that Divine Comfort, because you're hitting 4 mobs, or 4 heroes rather, you have the chance that you can get an additional crit, which is what I recommend, because that will give you some additional stress release. I personally find that this crits more often. I don't know what the code is written, or what's written in the code, but I see that you have 4 chances to crit here, and you have 1 chance to crit here, and this seems to crit far more often and give me some additional stress heals. I don't have any math to back that. It's just based off of playing the game a whole hell of a lot. So that's something I've found that's been beneficial to me as I've adapted that into my playstyle. So moving on, as we look at the camping skills. So one thing to kind of talk about is the Vestal really plays nice with the Crusader and the Leper, because those are religious characters. So her camping skills are really not the greatest. They're not really designed to, she's so valuable in the being able to heal your party that these aren't amazing camping skills. And they're designed that they really are only there to benefit religious and non-religious characters. So keep in mind, there are characters that are not stated that if they're religious or not, which will not help, which is the bounty hunter, the grave robber, and the highwayman. So it will not help them. At least that's how it was written in the code probably about a year ago. So when you're going through and picking your camping skills, I recommend pray, chant, and bless, and then I always typically recommend encourage unless they have really, really great camping skills. Only 1 or 2 heroes probably does, but always recommend encourage. The reason I recommend encourage is you can always, your heroes are always going to go to full health at the end of a dungeon. Whereas if you're camping towards the end of the dungeon, you can reduce yourself some expenses in gold by utilizing encourage rather than wound care and risking that they're going to be at a little lower health. So as you go through here, these are pretty much self-explanatory. They're going to reduce stress and reduce stress damage. One way you can use Sanctuary that I find very beneficial, if you're like me and you try and wait until the very end after you've completed the dungeon to camp to reduce all of your stress, it will actually produce a prevention from you getting ambushed at the very end. So you went through all that work, you get really low stress, you're going to come out with no stress. You want somebody who will prevent a nighttime ambush, so that's when I would find that beneficial. As far as the rest of these are pretty much no-brainers to take. There's not really any debate to take anything else. But Sanctuary can be switched for one of the 2 or one of the 3 here, depending on your party. From there, we'll go to your quirks, and we'll talk about what quirks are best with the Vestal. So, a lot of people play this differently, which is fine. You can see here I locked in Unyielding. That was because this hero has actually been with me for over 350 weeks. So at the time, I was really new in the game. This save is like over a year old. So what I would tell you is, in my opinion, where you want to start with the Vestal is really speed is very important. Especially when you get into a fight where things are going really, really poorly for you. Speed is much more valuable than percentage heal. So quick reflexes is a must take whenever it comes up. And then, you could take on guard, but in most situations, having the +4 dodge and +5 speed in the first round doesn't help you a ton, because in most fights, you aren't taking damage in the first round. You're already at full health. Sure, it allows her to get an additional Judgement off, which is where, you could debate whether you take it or not. So I wouldn't necessarily say that on guard is a bad move. It's probably 4th place. Steady, in my opinion, is the 2nd place of what you want to take with her. The reason for that is that you don't want your Vestal to become afflicted, because if she does, very often you run into situations where she can pass her turn, which can be devastating for your party, or hurt herself, and making it more difficult to you'd be really, really working from behind. So I find Steady extremely valuable. And then hard skin to give her additional prot, just in case she is crit or takes some damage from back row characters like the Arbalist, the Skeletal Arbalist. I feel those are probably the top four. Nothing wrong with taking on guard. Just depends on your playstyle. So lastly, we'll go to the trinkets and what I recommend for trinkets. So I see a lot on the Reddit forums that people really, really like. Let me find it here. This trinket, Junia's Head, because of the plus heal skills. Unfortunately, the plus 20% stress damage doesn't make it very valuable to me. In my opinion, Junia's Head is not nearly as good as Surgeon's Charm, which is found down here. Find where I put it. Here it is. Which is plus 15% heal skills, because there is no negative effect to it. The additional 30% heals are great, but when you're talking 1 or 2 HP versus the amount of stress you would incur. So on a typical heal, let's break down the math. On a typical heal, you get an additional 30%, and the value is truncated, which means rounded down. So let's say she heals for, we'll just say she gets a crit for 10 to make the math easy. That changes her heal to, it would be 13 instead of 11. So are those 2 HP worth an additional 20% stress damage for taking steps in the dungeons? Or maybe you get crit with one of those, let's just say you don't get crit, but some of the goblet throwers are going to hit you for 15 or 20. That means you're taking an additional 4 to 6 stress damage. In my opinion, it doesn't outweigh. The stress is way harder to get off. It costs you a lot more gold in the long run. So I really avoid a lot of the trinkets that give you plus stress damage unless I feel that they truly, truly outweigh a lot of problems for your party. So here's what I recommend if you're later in the game. So the Tomb of Holy Healing, which gives you 25% heal skills, and you do suffer a little bit of HP loss, but if we remove it, you'll see what that truly is. 40 to 44. So she loses 4 HP to get 25% heal skills. I feel that's valuable. The plus 2 speed on the Feather Crystal is why I'm bringing it, but a couple other options that you have late in the game could be the Sacred Scroll. The reason I didn't include it is the loss of speed sometimes can be too much depending on your party and their composition. And there's really, she has a lot of good trinkets that she has to choose from. Just depends on your playstyle, but there's a lot of stuff in here that you guys can use. If you are a newer player and you don't have access to these yet, I would definitely recommend Surgeon's Charm, the one I just showed you. But this one here isn't bad. The Haste Chalice isn't bad. The Youth Chalice I don't necessarily recommend, and same thing with the Virtuous Chalice. They're not really ones I'd recommend, but Feather Crystal is always a good play with her in my opinion because you get speed. And again, there's nothing wrong with having speed. The reason I don't recommend Haste Chalice in general is because the speed on the first round isn't nearly as valuable as the speed afterwards. So those are some of the trinkets I would recommend. If we look at overall rarity and we take a look at some of the Ancestors trinkets and we look through here, sure, there's some that are pretty solid, but a lot of these have that 10% stress damage, and if you're a newer player, it makes it a little more difficult. If you're seasoned, it can be a little bit better. Looking through the trophy trinkets, not really anything that would truly benefit her. I will give a special honorable mention to Ancestor's Bottle, which isn't utilized a lot, but you could throw that on one of your, maybe a leper, and really make him really, really tanky. As a matter of fact, I'll give you guys a demonstration right now and kind of show you. So he has 63 HP. It goes all the way up to 79 with the Ancestor's Bottle, which can be absolutely huge. If you can make him, make it so he's marking himself, so to speak, or so that he's taking most of the damage depending on the dungeon you're in, that's a huge increase in HP. So that's honorable mention if you're going to use somebody in a tanking like a tanking role, that's something that can be very, very helpful to you. So with that, there's the breakdown of the Vestal. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Thanks for all your support. If you have really low standards, please subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video.